Hey guys, what's up? My name is Zach, and today we'll be doing a 2018 Senate election prediction. So we're now 5 days away from the 2018 midterms on November 6th, and there's been a number of very important changes in a number of key Senate races throughout the United States, of which affect the makeup of the Senate pretty heavily. So as always, I'm going to start out with the safe blue states, which there are a few of. I don't believe there's been any changes in safe states since I made my last prediction. There might have been. I guess we'll see. But some of the important changes that have occurred since I made my last prediction are mainly having to do with Kavanaugh. However, there's been a number of important changes in individual Senate races as well. And now we're going to go over to the safe red states, which, again, I don't think has changed since my last prediction. Okay, so just making sure I didn't miss any states. Yeah, that looks good. Okay, so the first race I'm going to be calling is the Mississippi special election, which I'll be calling likely. Honestly, the only way that this Senate race will go blue is in the off chance that the second Republican competitor, whose name I don't really remember right now, I believe his name is yeah, I don't remember his name, but there's two Republicans running in this race, Cindy Hyde-Smith, and then there's a more Trump supporting Republican who's also running. That Republican is currently trailing behind Cindy Hyde-Smith. However, there is a chance that he can win, and if he does, then there is a very decent chance that that Mike Espy could win that race, but that's a very slim chance. Again, like with special elections in Mississippi, it's a bit complicated, but as a result of that complication, there is a chance the Democrat could win here. However, it's very, very slim, which is why I'm calling it first. Next race I'll be calling is Wisconsin, which will be likely, as I've called in just about every single one of my predictions. Honestly, there really has not been any key changes in this race to make it any more solid in the Democrats' column or any more less of the Democrats' column. Tammy Baldwin has been leading pretty consistently by about 8 or 7 points, I'd say, in most polls, and that's enough for me to call it likely in her column. I don't think there's a decent chance that Leah Vogtmeier could win. However, there's the slight chance that polls could have been very off, which in that case she could, but again, that's probably not going to happen. This state has been trending more blue, it has a very low approval of Trump, and it's probably going to go back into Tammy Baldwin's column for this election. Now going over to Minnesota special election, it's very synonymous to the Wisconsin Senate race. I gotta click on it to remind myself of the names. All right, it's not popping up. Tina Smith, that's the name. Tina Smith has been doing consistently well in the Senate in this special election throughout the course of the election cycle. And again, like I said, it's very synonymous to the Wisconsin Senate race. She's been leading by about a little less than 10 points over her Republican competitor, and in general, I would call it likely in her column. New Jersey, which I accidentally filled in blue, as I typically do, I'm going to call likely in Bob Menendez's column. Not a whole lot has changed here. I said in my last video that if Bob Menendez's lead increases in this state, then I will call it solid. However, that has not happened. It has stayed consistently by about 5 or 6 points, which is honestly a bit surprising. I think it's a combination of the fact that Bob Menendez just really is not very approved of in the state of New Jersey, mostly as a result of his trial over his use of election funds, and the fact that Bob Hugin is a pretty decent Republican competitor for New Jersey. And for those reasons, I would continue to call it likely in Bob Menendez's column, just because there's not a whole lot of indicators, especially not in the polls, to call it solidly in his column or anything other than likely blue. Going over to Montana, we have been starting to see more polls out of this state since I made my last prediction. I believe in my last prediction there really was not a whole lot of recent polls taken in this state. However, that has changed a lot. There's been, I believe, 5 or 6 polls taken in Montana, and all of them show Jon Tester leading by about 3 or 2 to 5 points, I believe. So for that reason, I would call it likely in Jon Tester's column, since nothing has really changed there from the polls taken a while back. Although this state obviously is considered to be red overall, Jon Tester is very approved of, especially for a Democrat in a red state. And as I've said in the past, Matt Rosendale is not the best Republican to be nominated for this race. So for those reasons, I would list it likely blue in Jon Tester's column. Going over to West Virginia, I'm going to call it likely in Joe Manchin's column. I was going to call it solidly, but there still is polls that show him leading by under 5 points, or at exactly 5 points, Joe Manchin. And honestly, many people look at the Senate race and are surprised that a Democrat is doing so well in a Senate race like this, but you have to keep in mind that although the state votes red in presidential elections, it typically does vote blue during off years, and especially during local elections. In general, this state would be blue if it wasn't for the coal factor. And Joe Manchin is a coal supporting Republican, and he did vote for Kavanaugh, which I think is a big factor in why this race remains likely in his column. So for those reasons, I would continue to list it likely in Joe Manchin's column. Going to North Dakota, I'll be moving the state from lean red to likely red. Heidi Heitkamp really, really messed up in this state overall. First, it was Kavanaugh that she really should have voted yes for. I think that would have done her a world of good if she voted yes for Kavanaugh. And then she screwed up with the campaign ads. I'm sure most of you have heard about this. She featured a number of women in her campaign ads without their consent. About the Me Too movement, and that prompted a lot of backlash. And Kevin Cramer has continued to lead by 9 or 8 points. I believe he's at 9 points on average. And for that reason, I would move it from lean red to likely red in Kevin Cramer's column. It's really just amazing how quickly this race moved from a competitive state to a non-competitive state. I'm almost tempted to call it solidly red in Kevin Cramer's column, because Heidi Heitkamp I don't think has a chance at winning at this point. It may not seem like a big deal with the campaign ad thing, but even a small screw up in a race this competitive, as you can already see, can change everything, and that's exactly what happened. She made a small screw up. Well, I mean, small in the grand scheme of things, it was a small screw up. It was it was just a little bit of lack of oversight, but that caused this competitive race to go all the way to Kevin Cramer's column, along with her vote against Kavanaugh. Obviously, I think that's a big factor as well. But in general, with those two factors, with Kavanaugh and the campaign ad issues, I'm going to list it likely in Kevin Cramer's column. Going down to Texas, there was a poll that was released today that showed Ted Cruz leading by just plus 3 points, which I thought was significant. However, obviously I'm not going to base one poll off of mine and apply it to my entire prediction. And I'll continue to list this race as likely red in Ted Cruz's column. As I said in my last prediction, and not a whole lot has changed since my last prediction in Texas either, Beto O'Rourke really has been doing a great job overall in the state of Texas. I mean, there's been times during the Senate race where it's been pretty competitive, but we're now nearing a point where Ted Cruz is pretty much guaranteed to win this race. I think there is a chance that there could be some very surprising switch around in this race come November 6th, but the only way I can see that happening is if there is a tremendous Democratic turnout, which there very could well be. That's been talked about a lot, and turnout really is everything when it comes to here. That's what makes these races, like in Texas and North Dakota, likely not solid, because there is the chance that there could be very strong Democratic turnout, which could change everything, which has been speculated by me and a number of other professional political pundits. But in general, this race likely in Ted Cruz's column. Not a whole lot has changed since my last prediction, so I won't be changing my prediction here either. Now going over to Tennessee, I'll be moving this race from lean red in Marsha Blackburn's column to likely red in Marsha Blackburn's column, giving the GOP the majority. And my logic with this race is because I think that Philip Bredesen not being completely supportive of Kavanaugh is a big factor in why this race went against him recently. And just looking at the polls, Marsha Blackburn has been leading consistently in polls. And just to clarify, I've been getting a number of comments critiquing my use of polls. My mentality with polls in general is to not look at a single poll and apply it to an entire race. When I look at polls, I look at multiple polls. I look at 5 or 6 polls all taken around the same time, and then I apply them to the race. Because if there's a number of polls all showing the same result, such as the same politician leading by plus 5 points or plus 4 points or in that range, and a number of polls taken around the same time, then that is what makes it a factor, at least in my predictions. And that's exactly what's happening here. Marsha Blackburn has been leading fairly consistently around 6 to, I believe, 12 points in polls for the past few weeks. And with 5 days away from the midterms, I honestly don't think there's a chance that Philip Bredesen can edge this out, given Marsha Blackburn's comeback. So for those reasons, I'll list Tennessee likely in the GOP's column, which gives the GOP a majority in this race. Going over to leaning races, I'll be moving Florida from tilt blue to lean blue. And this is mostly because Bill Nelson has been making a very substantial comeback in polls. Well, not really a comeback. I mean, he's leading by the same margins that he was in my last prediction. But those polls, as I said before when I was talking about how I use polls, he's been leading consistently by a range of like 2 to 10 points in a number of polls since my last prediction, and I think that most of that credit should go to Andrew Gillum, the Democratic nominee for the governor's race, and I don't think it's a coincidence that Bill Nelson started to make a comeback in polls right around the time when Andrew Gillum was nominated for the Democrats, because Andrew Gillum really is just full of charisma and full of passion. I mean, whether you're against him or for him, you can't deny that he is very passionate and he's very energizing, especially in Florida. And we're seeing that with the polls with him. He's been leading very well, especially for a Bernie Sanders supporter in Florida. He's been leading very well, Andrew Gillum, in the past few weeks. And I believe that Bill Nelson has been getting the effects from that as well. I think it's kind of more of like a mob mentality where if they're supporting Andrew Gillum, they're going to support Bill Nelson as well, just because they're both Democrats and they're both running together. So yeah, I do think that Andrew Gillum and his nomination for the Democratic Party is a big factor in why Bill Nelson is leading very well in this race, or leading consistently in this race. And for those reasons, I would list it, or I would move it from tilt blue to lean blue in Bill Nelson's column. Arizona, this race did become a bit competitive in the past few weeks. Not Marsha Blackburn. Martha McSally did make a bit of a comeback in polls. However, we've been seeing fairly recently that Kyrsten Sinema has been leading consistently by, I believe, a range of +2 to +6 in this race, and for that reason, I would continue to list it leaning in Kyrsten Sinema's column, just given the consistency in the polls that have been in our favor. Now moving over to Indiana, I'm going to move this race from tilt blue to lean blue. Although there have been some polls in this race that were in Mike Braun's favor, there have been more consistent polls that showed Joe Donnelly ahead, and I have to base consistency over individual polls, as I was saying before. And I believe that Joe Donnelly, his vote against Brett Kavanaugh was a bit of a mistake on his part. I think he would have done much better in the state if he voted for him. However, we're not seeing that having a tremendously negative effect on Joe Donnelly overall. He's been doing a pretty decent job throughout the Senate race, I think, at distinguishing himself from the rest of the Democratic Party, and as a Democrat who could work with Trump, which is important for a state like Indiana. And just based on the polls as well, I think that's also a factor. I'm going to list Indiana leaning in the Democrats' column. Now moving over to tilts, I'm going to be moving Missouri from tilt blue to tilt red, giving the Republicans one more seat for my last prediction. And this is because Josh Hawley has been leading. I keep saying leading consistently in polls, and I feel like kind of a broken record in that regard, but that really is a big factor in these races. If you're running in any of these Senate races and you have a consistent lead in polls, then obviously that's probably one of the largest factors, or the largest factor, in why this race would go to that person. And that's really the case with Josh Hawley. There's been consistent leads on his part. There have been a number of ties, and the Senate race still is very, very close. Whoever wins this race is going to be winning by maybe by under a margin of under 1%. I can see being a likely scenario. But Josh Hawley, I mean, Claire McCaskill hasn't been leading in a single poll in, I believe, over a month. Josh Hawley, like I said, there's been mostly ties in the number of Senate races, but Josh Hawley has been leading in other polls taken as well, and for those reasons, I'm going to list it tilting in Josh Hawley's column. Once I start to see more polls that show a consistent lead in Josh Hawley's favor as we near closer to November 6th, then I may move it to lean before the elections, but this race has been in dead heat since day one, and it's probably going to be in dead heat for the next 5 days as well, and I'm going to be listing it tilting in Josh Hawley's column, moving it to Claire McCaskill's column. Now moving over to Nevada, I'm going to call this race tilting blue, and this is one of the only races where I'm kind of separating from the polls because Dean Heller has been leading recently in polls, although Jackie Rosen has been leading in the most recent one, but that's not a tremendous factor. My logic with this Senate race is that it currently has a low approval of Trump. I believe it's -9 or -8 net approval. Dean Heller has not done enough at all to distance himself from Trump in any way, shape, or form. Jackie Rosen, her approval or likableness in general in the state of Nevada has gone down. I think that she didn't do very well during the debates against Dean Heller, which I think is another factor why Dean Heller has been leading in polls. However, as I was saying before, it's a Democratic state. It has a low approval of Trump. Dean Heller is a Trump supporter, and hasn't really separated himself from the president in that regard. And in general, I would call it tilting in Jackie Rosen's column, and I have a feeling that we're going to start to see polls that show Jackie Rosen more ahead as we near closer to November 6th. That might change, and if it does, if I see Dean Heller continue to lead in polls, then I'm probably going to move it out of Dean Heller's column, out of Jackie Rosen's column, and into Dean Heller's column. But for now, this is my call for the state, and this is my call for the Senate race as a whole. So as you can see here, the Republicans have increased their majority in the Senate, and in general, the Democrats should not be optimistic about winning the Senate at all. The only path that the Democrats could have to winning the Senate is if they keep Nevada in their column, if they keep all these leaning and tilting states in their column, and if they somehow manage to take Missouri, and then maybe if they manage to take Tennessee or Texas. I don't think North Dakota is a possibility, but if they manage to take Tennessee or Texas, then they would win with 51 seats. But that's not going to happen. I'd say the likelihood for that is like under 20%. Like, I'd say the likelihood for that happening is like 10%. Honestly, I'm going to give the Republicans like a 90% chance of holding on to their majority in the Senate at this point. I don't see a possibility for Democrats to win in this race. It's not a winnable race, I think, in general for them at this point. All right, so that's the prediction. I hope you guys enjoyed it. This is my second to last Senate prediction. I'm going to be making one more the day before the midterms. Same with the House. I'm going to be reanalyzing a number of different House races, and then I'll report on them the day before the midterms. And in general, if you guys have any comments or critiques in general, please feel free to leave them down below. If you like the video, please feel free to leave a like, share, and subscribe. It's the only way for small channels like mine to grow, and I hope you guys have a good day. See ya.